Just minutes from now, the St. Francis Xavier School Board of Trustees scheduled to meet for the first time since a series of terminations and resignations.
A number of people are expected to attend, including parents seeking information about why recent staffing changes have taken place. Jason Zimmerman is in Appleton outside Xavier High School with a preview. Jason.
As you can see from the school's parking lot, people just starting to arrive for tonight's meeting, which is open to the public but closed to the media. The controversy stems from a string of recent departures with very little information. The first one involving Xavier High School principal Mike Mothy, who was fired in November for violating the Green Bay Catholic Diocese, our promise to protect policy. While the Xavier school system hasn't said what Mothy's violation was exactly, the policy relates to creating an environment that protects children and anyone at risk from harm. Nearly 2 weeks later, Superintendent John Revisa was also fired for violating policy by failing to meet reporting requirements with the ongoing investigation into Mothy. Former trustee Chris Wolski resigned weeks ago, and the board also announced interim president Katie Himes' resignation December 4th. Parents demanding answers have launched a Facebook page to support the former principal, who was already planning to leave for another job at the end of the school year. That job offer was rescinded as a result of Mothy's termination at Xavier. While the diocese is not allowing the media inside to cover the meeting, we will work to bring you an update from people who went tonight at 10 o'clock. Reporting in Appleton, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.